Okay, hello everyone. This is the sixth forum this session. Angel Tsvetkov is going to talk about holotropic states of consciousness. He's going to talk specifically about the phenomenology of conscious experience. There is going to be something about meditation, about reaching the wholeness, maybe related to religion and philosophy and other spiritual techniques. But because we are running out of time, I will be very short. So Angel, please.
Okay, so holotropic state of consciousness, I will start with just saying consciousness. There are a few words here that are quite ambiguous. The first one is holotropic, the second one is state, and the third one is consciousness. So when I say consciousness, I basically mean about the actual experience, something that we perceive, something that comes out in our mental screen, something that comes out in us as a thought. So the actual phenomenology of our conscious experience. This is what I think of when I say consciousness. And states, this word states implies to different ways to experience consciousness, different ways to experience ourselves, and different ways to experience what is out there. Basically, we can say that there are different states of consciousness, as in a state when we're drunk, or a state as we're in a deep sleep, or as in a state when we're awakened, when we're listening to class, or as in a state where we are meditating, or a different state when we are under influence of certain drugs. And finally, the word holotropic. This word basically comes from two Greek words, holos and trepein, which means moving towards wholeness. His name is Stanislav Grof, and he was born in Prague in Czech Republic, and did a lot of research on these altered states of consciousness. Basically states which are induced through different kinds of means, from meditation, through rapid breathing, shamanic techniques, all the way to LSD. He did a big research on LSD therapy. And based on his experiences, he did a mapping of the human psyche. So basically, he did something which he calls a cartography of the human psyche. It's very interesting how this cartography differs from what our mainstream psychology tells us that human psyche is. And by the way, his work, the reason why I like his work is because studying anthropology and studying different two spiritual writings that we have seen in different religious beliefs. So basically, holotropic states of consciousness are altered states of consciousness in which the mind moves towards a sense of wholeness. Now, these are opposed to consciousness changes caused by pathological processes like cerebral traumas, poisonous chemicals, infections, or degenerative and circulatory processes in the brain. So basically, we can have altered states of consciousness just by having a brain damage. We can have altered states of consciousness by ingesting some poisonous chemical, etc. But these states are characterized by the fact that the brain is not impaired. And people are actually mostly fully conscious in it. And instead of, unlike alcohol, where people on long term it damages the brain, these states do not damage the brain. Actually, people come out with better mental health than before. So people typically remain fully oriented in terms of space and time, but at the same time, our awareness is flooded with unusual concepts of consciousness. So this can happen in meditation, this can happen in some shamanic Sufi whirling process, or it can happen under ayahuasca or LSD. There are different ways to trigger what comes out, what contents come out in our consciousness. So briefly, just shamans of all pre-industrial world cultures were proficient in entering these altered states of consciousness in a controlled manner. And this was mentioned last week, right? When, what was the name of the professor?
John Rush.
When John Rush mentioned that he was right on it, basically. by saying that absolutely people were cultivating the states in different means to gain an answer to something. Like, for example, obtaining knowledge of the world, healing, diagnosing diseases, explorations of alternate dimensions of reality, etc. There's a lot of anthropological work on how shamans enter these states to gain knowledge which herbs to use to make a healing concoction of different kinds, which is very cool, which is very different from how we today, how current pharmacologists obtain knowledge on what to use for healing a certain disease in a lab. It's very different by you entering a state and communicating with some spirit and coming out with a effective knowledge on how to heal. So, ways to induce these states. Breath, like pranayama, breathing in yoga, throat music that you've heard the Tibetan monks singing, yogic qigong practices. Then we have sound technologies like drumming, rattling, use of sticks, bells, gongs, music, chanting, didgeridoo, etc. Didgeridoo, by the way, while people are playing a didgeridoo, it induces hyperventilation, which by itself already induces an altered state in a person who is playing it on the didgeridoo, including when that is combined with the vibration of the actual instrument, combined with the hyperventilation. What is hyperventilation? When we start breathing rapidly without making breaks. Anybody can try it. You will see that in 5 to 10 minutes you will start experiencing bodily and psychological changes. And just lie down and start breathing without a break. It doesn't have to be fast, but without break between breathe in and breathe out. So didgeridoo precisely induces this altered state by combining rapid breathing or circular breathing without a break and this vibration of the sound. So it's actually very powerful on the people who are using it. If you do it for 30 minutes, an hour, it definitely affects somebody's consciousness. Dancing, other forms of movement like whirling Sufi dervishes, Tai Chi, Hatha Yoga, Qigong, social isolation, sensory deprivation, stay in deserts, caves, mountaintops, vision quests of Australian Aboriginals. And it's funny that these kind of things we see in every culture. The people, we have individuals who are ready to go through such ordeals in order to experience something. Why would they do that? And usually we would say, oh, it's because, like the mainstream psychology or psychiatry would say, oh, it's because they have some kind of strange belief, or it's because, they have some subconscious hate for life and blah, blah, blah. There are all kinds of strange explanations, but research into this state actually gives us a different answer. Then we have meditation, prayer, other spiritual practices. We have Zen practice, Tantra, yoga, mystic practices in Christianity. We have hesychastic traditions in Orthodox Christianity. We have in Catholicism, there are Franciscans. We have some mystic practices. Ritual use of psychedelic plants and substances is also widespread, especially among indigenous cultures. We basically rarely see a more advanced culture, like after the agricultural advent, like we see much less of psychedelic usage, like peyote, ayahuasca, iboga, Hawaiian woodrose, secretion from the skin of the toads, buchalvarius, fish, etc.
Picking toads.
Yeah. Well, these kind of things you usually see in mostly in hunter-gatherer societies. Once they start getting agricultural, they get streamlined towards a very specific groups of people, and beyond that, I don't think most of the time, people that do it secretively, but they're not part of the mainstream social practice. So Grof experimented with different means to induce holotropic states of consciousness, and he did most extensive research into the so-called psycholytic therapy, mostly using LSD as a mind-altering agent. But later originated a method called holotropic breathing, basically circular breathing, when you lie down and you breathe without a break, where these states can be induced by the means of rapid breathing and vocative music and body work. Now here they talk about LSD, which I don't think it's really necessary for us to everybody knows about that drug, and we can Google it, so I don't need to give introductions for that. We have time limit. So Based on his research, this is the interesting part. He distinguishes three general levels or domains that the subject passes through during a course of holotropic therapy. So basically, patients come, and he was fully trained psychiatrist who started using LSD to trigger healing, to trigger an actual healing of the psychological traumas in the subject. And this is what he says. Biographical domain. This is the first one. This is the first layer that comes out in the subjects when something is being healed. What does it mean? Materials from one's life are being addressed. So basically we think about when we're kids, when something bad happened to us, when we're humiliated or beaten, and blah, blah, blah. All of this happens in the first layer of the psycholytic LSD, mostly during the time, but also the holotropic therapy. So experiences from this life, mostly traumatic ones that might be related to the client's psychological or psychosomatic problems. But then there is another one. And so the biographical domain, this domain is really not that much different to what mainstream psychotherapy deals with. Unless they medicate you, they talk to you about these life experiences, and then you talk and people feel better after that. But then there is another domain which is already getting to the fringes of the mainstream psychology, which is the perinatal domain. The word perinatal means related to birth. Natal means birth, peri means related to. So related to birth. And this is a part of the therapy where the trauma of biological birth is being addressed. Very fascinating part. And in this perinatal domain, there are 4 sub-levels. Like Groff says that there are 4 sub-levels, different parts of it. And seemingly, all of us are related to different sub-levels. So there are different sub-levels which are mostly affecting different people. I'll talk to you about that soon. So basically, there are 4 sub-levels which he calls the basic perinatal matrices, or he calls them BPMs. And finally, after this perinatal domain, there's the transpersonal domain. This is the weirdest domain. So by now we talk about 3 levels. The first one is biographical level, the one which is related to your biography, to this life. The second one is the one which is related to your birth, and it has 4 sub-levels. And there is another one, the transpersonal domain. So transpersonal is going beyond the personal. In Chinese that would be 超个人, transpersonal domain. And in this level, the subject might go through a wide variety of experiences characterized by a loss of traditional boundaries of ego, space, time, where limitations can be transcended in different ways. You don't have to be high on LSD to experience this. Like people can experience these states in different, just through meditation and all kinds of non-pharmacologically induced methods. So transpersonal domain is called like that because it says it goes beyond the personal. So basically, in the first phase, the biographical level, the postnatal is after the birth. The postnatal biography and the individual subconscious. This is the first phase, and in this phase, the subject usually does not only remember emotionally significant events, does not only tries to reconstruct them, like what people do when they go to psychotherapy. They lie down, they talk about it, they intellectualize about it, and they try to reconstruct it. But what happens on this level is that people actually experience the original emotions, experience the physical sensations, experience the sensory perceptions in a full age regression. They experience that they are a little kid being beaten. They experience the physical sensations of that. So the body image of the subject, the emotions, the gestures, they all correspond to what the person was or felt at that time. So it's very interesting because at the same time people experience that, but they are not completely lost. They experience themselves as well. So there is an added dimension. You're not lost in that experience, but you also experience yourself experiencing it. So when you experience yourself experiencing it, it's probably one of the things that helps this experience to be reintegrated. Because at the time when we're experiencing this trauma, we were not experiencing ourselves experiencing it. We were basically overwhelmed by the actual traumatic experience. So there was a switch off, and this experience continued to have this aberration on our behavior. So, but when we have this conscious, different awareness, the integration of this experience happens. So there are often traumas of physical nature, and they all emerge spontaneously. You don't push them, you don't do anything, they just emerge. Like there is a radar in our consciousness who basically hunts for these experiences. So Grof knows that history of physical traumas can regularly be found in clients suffering from asthma, migraine, headaches, psychosomatic pains, phobias, depression, etc. And that relieving of these traumas can have far-reaching therapeutic consequences on one's asthma, or that it might not disappear, but the attacks might get less severe, the frequency might get less severe, etc. So he talks about this COEX, or basically means systems of condensed experience. CO like condensed and EX experience. And this is basically what? This is emotionally charged memories from different periods of our lives that resemble each other in the quality of emotion or physical sensation that they share. So we'll talk about that soon when I go through the different stages. I think I'll skip this first. But I'll just say that these systems play a very important role in one's life and influence the ways in which we perceive ourselves. In a radar, I already mentioned that once client enters the holotropic state, the material for processing is chosen quite automatically. Why? Because these states tend to engage something like an inner radar. And this inner radar automatically brings into consciousness the contents from the unconscious that have the strongest emotional charge, are most psychodynamically relevant at that time, and most readily available for conscious processing. So it only brings things that are that the client can actually process. It won't push you beyond that limit. What I think people will get overwhelmed by, whether by ingesting certain pharmacological mind-altering substances or practicing certain things without a guidance is, well, basically when they're doing it outside the context of in which they were meant to be used.
I still don't know what is it. There's no empirical evidence to prove that consciousness exists. So you're conflating consciousness with soul and spiritualism. I'm still unsure of what it is.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Oh, we will.
Yeah.
I've been waiting a long time.
Okay. But basically, when you're in this state, your consciousness spontaneously brings out certain events of your life from this time. When you're not anything spiritual, basically. You re-experience some events that happened to you when you were a kid, that happened to you when you were adult, that somehow were overwhelming to you. So you re-experience that, and with guidance of a psychiatrist, you integrate that.
Sure.
But it goes beyond. Now there is the perinatal level of the unconscious. So perinatal, like pertaining to birth. So basically the traditional medicine denies that the child can consciously experience birth and claims that this event is not recorded in memory. So one never hears about perinatal experiences. So the academic psychiatry generally denies the possibility that biological birth can have strong psychotraumatic impact on the child. The reason being that the cerebral cortex of the newborn is not fully myelinized. And if it's not myelinized, then we cannot have an actual storage of the memory. So this is the most common argument about it. But according to his clinical observations, and not just his, there is a number of psychologists that have been working on the perinatal trauma, as they call it. Basically, the amount of emotional and physical stress involved in childbirth is so great that it clearly surpasses that of any postnatal trauma in infancy and childhood, most of the time. Sometimes people do experience something incredibly bad, something incredibly traumatic even in this life, which is even bigger than the birth trauma. But according to his clinical research, over thousands of subjects
But isn't that Scientology?
We'll look at the question part later.
I know, but I just want to interject for one moment.
Yeah,
You're talking
sure,
about,
yeah.
talking about postnatal
Okay.
feelings and emotions
Yes,
at
yes.
a conscious level when
Yes.
you're in embryo.
Mhm.
That you're not allowed, the woman, your mother is not allowed to scream.
Oh, okay.
Or when she's giving birth
Okay.
to the child, because it could traumatize the child.
Yes.
You're introducing consciousness to that
Yes,
child.
yes, yes.
You're introducing horror and pain.
Mhm.
And you don't want that child to be
Yes,
cognizant
yes.
of that.
Yes.
Is
Okay.
that a huge part of it?
No. I never read anything that he said that the mother should be quiet or that nobody should speak during birth. He basically speaks about the actual process of the child going through the cervix, and that there is some kind of imprint in our conscious experience, memory, that we don't really recall it like this, but once you go into this deeply altered state, whether it's induced through breathing. Actually, I've seen people experience this while they're just rapidly breathing. It happens that the person just gets convulses and start making noises as a child. Something very interesting happens. I've seen that personally.
Yeah.
And so I know that Scientologists in their Dianetic processing have been talking about this,
Yeah.
but it's completely unrelated to that. But it's interesting that there are different practices who have gotten to this point that yes, the process of birth do have this, there is this amount of emotional, physical stress which somehow stays imprinted, maybe not in a classical sense of what we call memory, but somehow it remains there. So basically, reliving these various episodes of biological birth can be very convincing, he says, and often replace the process in photographic detail. People actually remember a lot of things, whether they were, whether they had like the umbilical cord attached around their neck, or like details that they didn't know before that, and after that maybe they inquired with their mothers and they found out that these details were true. People actually find out details about their birth through this. In this regard, people with no intellectual knowledge about their birth and who like elementary obstetric education, obstetric means about related to birth, can give detailed information about the processes of their birth only on the account of re-experiencing it during a holotropic session. So, accompanied with postures and movements that reflect the mechanics of a particular type of delivery, they can give all this kind of information. And he said that there is this intimate connection between birth and death. Because many people, when they experience this process of birth, during the session, they feel they're dying. So these are